Hello, my name is Alice and welcome to my channel. Today, I'm going to show you how to paint these intuitive landscapes. So these are going to be painted from your head. They're going to be super easy. You don't have to plan. There's going to be no sketching or drawing. We're just going to basically create these from our intuition and just kind of create as we go. And this is something that I truly believe that anyone can do, whether you consider yourself an artist or a painter. This is something that you can follow along with. I'm going to break it down into really simple steps, and it's a really, really fun project. And it's a really great way to get your creativity going and to kind of get into painting, especially if you're nervous about painting or anything like that. So I'm going to be using some watercolor paints today, as well as some colored pencils and some other things. And I'm really, really excited to show you the process of these. So let's go ahead and jump right into the tutorial. So you're going to need some paper, and I'm going to tape that down to a board. I'm using watercolor paper. I would definitely recommend using some watercolor paper or some really thick, high quality paper. Paper makes a big difference. It really, really does. So I'm going to tape that down, and then I'm going to use this big flat brush to paint water on. That's going to be step one, is just coat that whole thing in water. Optionally, for one of the pieces I'm going to do some masking fluid. If you have masking fluid or you'd like to experiment with this, it's really fun. You just take the wet paper and then you're going to dab that masking fluid on, and it'll blend out and blur a little bit. And this is a really good way to create clouds. When we first start with these, the only idea that I really have in mind is the color scheme that I want to do. So I'm going to basically start with those color schemes. So after I've gotten all of the water on, we're going to let that first one with the masking fluid dry. And we're going to jump to the second one because I'm going to show you two different paintings. And for the second one, once we've gotten that wet, we're going to go in with some watercolor paint. And this is going to be the start of step two. So take this fluffy brush, and I actually like to get like 2 colors at one time, or even 3 if I can. And you're just going to start throwing that down. Don't worry, don't plan. You don't need to worry about what you're doing. Just start throwing colors down and see what happens. So for me, at this point, all I have in my mind is ocean and blue, and then I'm like, maybe nighttime. So I'm starting throwing in some purples, some greens, and some blues. That's it. That's all we're doing. We're just kind of letting that water sit and letting those paints blend. And then I'm going to go and I'm going to take some paper towel. I'm going to crumple it up, and I'm going to dab that on the area that's going to be the sky. So, you know, the upper half of the painting. And this is kind of where you can start to decide where your horizon line is going to be. For me, I haven't really put too much into it. I've put it in the center, but you can put it higher up. You can put it lower down, whatever you want to do. And I'm going to use a spray bottle just to kind of diffuse that out. Spray bottles are really, really, really useful. Definitely recommend having one of those around. And I'm just going to keep playing with it, adding in a little bit more colors as I start seeing what's coming out of here. So as you can see, I've started to create a little bit of an ocean down at the bottom and a little bit of a sky up top, but really we just have colors blending around. I also decided I wanted a moon, so I went ahead and dabbed out a little circular part with the paper towel so I could create a little area for the moon. Then I went back to the painting with the masking fluid, and this is going to be step 2 for that painting. So I'm going to start doing what I did on that blue painting and throwing in all of these colors, this wet on wet. And for this one, I know I want to do pinks and oranges and maybe a sunrise. And that's all I have in my head right now is maybe dawn, maybe pinks and oranges. So I'm kind of keeping the center light where I think that sun's going to be, and I know the sky is going to be pink. But really, other than that, all I'm doing is throwing on colors and moving them around until something interesting emerges. So you're not planning this, you're seeing what the paints develop into. Once your first layer is dry, we're going to move on to your second layer, and that's going to be step 3. And this is where we're going to start to define things a little bit more than before. So take a look at what you've created and at what has naturally formed, and you can start to see little things. You can start to pull out clouds in that sky. You can start to pull out little waves or, you know, little places where there might be a tree or a bush. And what I'm doing is I'm using those to inform where I'm going to put the next part, like the next step. So in this part, I'm creating that horizon line. I'm making that a bit more defined, and I'm really working on the sky. I'm adding in some cloud shapes, but I'm still letting the colors blend. I'm still being really loose with the colors. I'm just throwing in some blues and some pinks, but you're creating these little cloud shapes and letting the colors blend together. And then once that's dry, you always kind of want to wait for those layers to dry so they don't bleed into each other. I'm adding in some really loose shading on the ocean, just again creating this second base layer. We're going to add more detail later. So again, keep it loose, keep it fun. Right now we're just establishing. If the first layer was establishing the colors, this second layer is starting to establish the overall structure of the landscape, right? So like we've got the ocean and then the sky. Now in this one, and the moon. Now in this one, we're going to start developing where that horizon line is. And for this one, I think I want a curved horizon line. I'm thinking, I don't want this to be straight. I think I want some hills in here. And so I start developing those hills. I'm using a wet on wet technique. So what I'm doing is I'm taking that big fluffy brush from before and I'm using water and I'm filling in that area and then I'm dropping color into it. Right now, I just dropped in a bunch of water that's going to push that color out and create all these cool bleeds. This is an intuitive painting. We're not trying to be perfect here. We're not trying to recreate something that already exists. We're building something from our imagination. So you can have so much fun with colors. You can make the grass blue or purple or orange or whatever color you want to make it. You can play around with textures and with, structure and colors and just allow yourself to really be creative, because that is the point of this exercise, is to really just tap into painting intuitively and painting each layer based on what the previous layer does. So for this one, for the second layer, I'm adding in little bits of color to add more color diversity and depth. And you can see I've created the structure of these two hills here and added some basic shading to it. Step 4 is going to be even more development, and this is where we're really going to start to create the details of this. So for this ocean, I'm using some darker blues and greens to really start creating the structure of these waves. Now, before this, I had done those waves really loosely. I wasn't really paying that much attention to them, and that actually created a structure of waves that I could then build on and start to define a little bit more, and will continue to define throughout the painting. So another thing that I did was I also took the brush, and when it was a little drier, I kind of like, you saw it a few moments ago, I just kind of like brushed it, grazed it across the surface. That's really good if you're doing water, because it creates this really like textured look. And once the water was dry, I went back to the sky and kept developing that. I went around the moon so that it looked a little bit sharper and you could actually see it. And I also put this little cloud in front of the moon. And this is where you can really see me start to add more and more cloud shapes and just layer them up. So I have this like basic gradient background with some modeling, and now I'm going in and being like, okay, let's add cloud shape. So we'll paint that cloud shape in a darker purple, and then I'll go in and kind of drop in some other pinks or some blues into that cloud. That's going to create some shading and color diversity in that cloud as well. Now going back to the ocean, this is where I'm going to start defining those waves even more. And what I'm going to do is, you see I have this pointed brush. I'm going to take the brush and I'm going to kind of keep the point, and then I'll press down and then I'll pull back to the point, and it's going to create those diamond-like shapes. You can kind of see they're like weird off diamonds. That's a really great shape to use when you're trying to define the little crest of those waves. So if your intuitive painting has taken you in the direction of water, that's a little tip that I have. And just start defining the underside of those waves and figuring out where that shading is going to be. But as you saw, this whole thing developed just from scribbles and scratches, and then I was able to look at those and start creating details from that. Going back to the second piece with the pinks and the yellows, we're going to take off the masking fluid, which I'm using this crafter square for. There's also going to be a mistake. As you can see, I just tore the paper. I don't think my masking fluid fully dried, but what I used to fix this was I actually used some watercolor ground. So if you ever have this issue, you can go ahead and get watercolor ground. It's basically like a liquid watercolor paper, and you can paint that on top, and that really helped. I did have to do a second layer later after I added some color in, but it did work really well in the long run. Then I moved on to the bottom part with the hills, and these definitely needed some more details and like some more definition. So I decided to add in a little pathway, and once I added in the pathway, I wanted some little hedgerows along the pathway, and then I thought I would blanket the hillside in these little like rows of hedges. If you've ever been to England or flown across England, you've got, I mean, there's other countries too, but for me, it like specifically when I think of England, there's all these little like squares of hedgerows and little fields, and that's kind of what I was thinking of. And I just drew squares and then started adding, bits of color in between them, just adding in these little lines. I had no idea where this was going at the start, but as you can see, it's just been one little step. Like everyone watching this can draw a triangle. Those hills are triangles. Look at them. That's two triangles. Two triangles with 4 lines on top. I guarantee every single person here can draw 2 2 angles, 2 triangles, and 4 lines. That means you can do this. So then jumping back to the sky, you can see I jump back and forth between the two, between the sky and the ground. The reason for that is if you're using watercolor, you really want to make sure that like those two are dry because you don't want them to mix at the horizon line. So it helps for me to kind of go back and forth between the two. So like I can let the top part dry while I'm working a little bit on some of the details of the bottom part and vice versa. For some final details, I knew I needed to add a little bit of foliage because this was actually like a land piece. It wasn't just like the ocean, and the ocean one I didn't add any rocks or ships or anything. So I decided to add in a tree. The reason I was inspired to add in this tree was actually because of the sky. There was a little bloom, a little I don't know what to call them, cabbage, you know, where the paint gets all like pushed and crackled, and it looked like a tree. And so that's what inspired me to put a tree there, because the painting informed me to do so. I did a little bush in the corner, and I just kind of slapped the edge of the brush on here. Really pay attention to how you can use your brush. This is impressionistic. It's abstract. It's not perfect. You don't need to paint every little leaf on the tree. You don't need to paint every little leaf on the bush. Just slap your paintbrush on there, get some little dots going and some speckles, and you're going to be great. So once you have that, we're going to go to step 5. And this is the finishing final step. You almost made it, besties. I'm so proud of you. And I'm going to use colored pencils for this step. You don't have to use colored pencils. You can stop if you want. You can use paint, whatever you want to use. But I like to use colored pencils to add in a little bit more definition because they layer really nicely over the watercolor, and they're just like sharper and pointier. It's just a little easier to get in some definition, and you can layer a lighter color over the darker color. So for the ocean, I'm adding in this white, this blue, and this green, and I'm using the white to kind of highlight the very peaks, and then I'm using the green to highlight the peaks, but in ones that I don't want to stand out quite as much. And then some of the blues I'm actually using to highlight a little bit of the underside of the wave, because when that wave comes up and crests, the underside of the wave is darker, but it still has some shading in it and some variation in color. So that's really going to add some depth to your piece as well. And I'm not looking at any references for this. I'm just going with it. I'm like, does that look cool? Cool. Great. We're not trying, like, it's not perfect. It's fine. Look, I just messed up. I did my little spray thing for my stars with some white paint, and I kind of messed up. But then I went in and I scrubbed at it with my water, and look, I fixed it. So that's kind of like how I finished this one off. I also used some white paint and some white pens, as you saw. And then I went in for the second one with some pencils, and I didn't use much on this one because this one I didn't feel like needed too much, but I did want to add a little bit of a sun-kissed look coming over that hill and just kind of hitting those trees and those hedgerows. So once you are done with all your little final details and adding in some little colored pencil to add in like depth or lines or whatever, you have to sign your work. It's very important to sign your work. So sign your work because you did it. And even if you don't love it, like you did it, you made that, you freaking made something. You don't have to love it. You still did something. You still accomplished something. Next thing you do, you learned something. You'll have learned more. So peel off your tape. I recommend peeling your tape off at a 90-degree angle and keeping it very, very close to the table. And your pieces are done. So these are the 2 pieces that I made from intuitive painting with no planning. I hope that walking you through that simple, kind of basic step process gave you some ideas or inspired you to try this. If you try making an intuitive landscape, please, please, please tag me on Instagram. I would love to see it, or Twitter, show me it. I really would love to see what you made. And if you liked this video, then please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment. It would be so, so helpful. And yeah, definitely don't forget to check me out on Twitch. I stream 5 days a week, Thursday through Monday. Okay, I love you. Thanks for watching. Have a great rest of your day. Bye!